They say history is written by the victors. But what if the most terrifying story was buried, blood-soaked, in the castle walls? What if a noblewoman believed bathing in virgin blood could keep her young forever? So, you've heard of Dracula, right? The fanged vampire from Transylvania? Well, Elizabeth Bathory makes Dracula look like a bedtime story. Born into one of the most powerful families in Hungary in 1560, Elizabeth was rich, beautiful, and titled. But behind the silk dresses and polished manners hid someone who would go down in history as the world's most prolific female serial killer. This video is going to take you deep into her twisted world. From her haunted childhood to the horrifying rumors of what she did to over 600 girls, and how the myth of the Blood Countess was born. Stay until the end because there's a chilling twist about whether everything we know about her is even true. Before we dive into the Elizabeth Bathory, the Countess who bathed in blood, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more histories. Thank you. Elizabeth Bathory was born on August 7th, 1560, in the Kingdom of Hungary, into the elite and powerful Bathory family. Her birthright placed her among the highest ranks of European nobility. Her family tree was not just lined with gold, it was dripping in titles and bloodlines of emperors, warlords, and kings. She was the niece of Stephen Bathory, who would become King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. From her earliest days, Elizabeth lived a life few could imagine. While most children were learning nursery rhymes, she was being tutored in politics, philosophy, and etiquette, not just how to host a dinner, but how to command a throne. She spoke multiple languages fluently by the time she was a teenager: Latin, German, Hungarian, and possibly even Greek. Her intellect was praised and feared. It was rare for a woman to be educated at all in the 16th century, let alone on the level of royalty. But power has a price, and hers came with darkness. From a young age, Elizabeth was reportedly prone to seizures and intense mood swings. Some modern scholars suggest she may have suffered from epilepsy or bipolar disorder. In those days, such conditions were not understood. They were treated with leeches, prayers, or worse, ignored. And in a world where brutality was part of daily governance, Elizabeth was shaped by what she saw. It is said she witnessed public executions and brutal punishments as a child. Some tales go even further, claiming she was taught by relatives and caretakers how to discipline servants with whips and hot irons. These were not whispers in the night. This was how aristocrats ruled over the lower classes. Torture was not just accepted, it was expected. And the family she came from? They weren't saints. The Bathorys were warriors, landowners, and political masterminds. But they were also rumored to dabble in the occult. Her aunt was said to be a witch who practiced dark magic, while an uncle was known for alchemy and astrology. There were stories of satanic rituals in their castles, of wolves and owls used in spellwork, and of experiments with immortality. Whether or not these stories are true, they painted Elizabeth's world in black and crimson. She reportedly had an illegitimate child at age 13 with a servant, a scandal that was quickly covered up by the family. The child was said to be sent away in secrecy, possibly killed. Again, records are sparse, but where there is smoke, there was often fire. As she grew older, her personality only hardened. Elizabeth was known to be strikingly beautiful, but distant, proud, and controlling. Servants and townsfolk alike feared her temper. There are accounts that she beat a servant girl so badly for misplacing a hairpin that the girl couldn't walk for days. But these are just the stories that survived. Imagine what was never written down. She lived in a time when women had little power unless they came from noble birth. Elizabeth didn't just have power. She commanded fear. She didn't just run a household. She oversaw entire estates, managed economics, and punished wrongdoers with a cruelty that became infamous. Historians argue over what shaped her most, her bloodline or her upbringing. Maybe it was both. She was born into a world that rewarded coldness, where mercy was seen as weakness, and where nobles believed they were ordained by God to rule as they pleased. Behind the silk gowns and chandelier-lit hallways, Elizabeth Bathory's young life was shaped by shadows. She wasn't born a monster, but she was certainly raised in a castle that taught her how to become one. Elizabeth was just 15 years old when she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a union that, at first glance, seemed like a typical aristocratic alliance. Ferenc came from another prominent Hungarian noble family. Although he did not hold the same level of status as the Bathorys, his reputation on the battlefield earned him widespread respect. He would later become known as the Black Knight of Hungary, a title he earned not only through his valor in war, but also for his ruthless efficiency and cruelty toward his enemies. Their wedding was extravagant, attended by nobles from across the region. Thousands of guests gathered to celebrate this powerful union, one that united two strong bloodlines. As part of the arrangement, Ferenc took on the Bathory name to preserve Elizabeth's higher status, and she brought an immense dowry that included lands, castles, and money. Soon after the wedding, Elizabeth moved into Castle Countess, nestled high on a hill in present-day Slovakia. This fortress, cold and isolated, would become infamous as the center of her dark legend. While Ferenc spent most of his time away at war battling the Ottoman Empire, Elizabeth was left to manage the estate, and she took to her new role with terrifying ease. It wasn't long before Ferenc, despite his military obligations, played a disturbing role in shaping Elizabeth's descent into cruelty. Though their marriage was distant, they reportedly shared a similar taste for violence. While Ferenc was celebrated on the battlefield, at home, he allegedly taught Elizabeth advanced torture techniques. One of the more infamous gifts he gave her was a spiked glove meant for disciplining disobedient servants. This wasn't just discipline in the traditional sense. This was sadism wrapped in the robes of noble authority. Some say their relationship was based on mutual respect, but that respect was drenched in blood and fear. The two shared a dark bond that grew more twisted with time. Ferenc was known for impaling captured enemies and leaving their corpses to rot as a warning. Elizabeth, inspired or emboldened, began to apply similar ideas in her own castle, not on soldiers, but on young girls. As Ferenc rode off into battle, Elizabeth oversaw the daily operations of Castle Countess. But managing crops and taxes wasn't enough to satisfy her. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Servant girls disappeared. New maids arrived and were never seen again. Local villagers whispered of strange cries in the night, of girls who were hired but never returned home. And yet, nothing was done. You have to understand, Elizabeth wasn't just a noble. She was untouchable. Her word was law on her lands. And if a peasant accused her of wrongdoing, that peasant risked more than just public shame. They risked torture, imprisonment, even death. The environment inside the castle began to change. Servants walked on eggshells. One mistake, dropping a tray, missing a spot while cleaning, could result in unspeakable punishment. Some were beaten, others were starved, and some vanished completely. According to testimonies gathered later, Elizabeth took an almost scientific interest in pain. She experimented with different ways to hurt her victims. Hot irons, cold water, whips, needles, under fingernails. She documented what worked best, which screams lasted longest, which punishments left the least visible marks. She wasn't working alone. Over time, she developed a small, trusted circle of accomplices. These included her wet nurse, her chambermaid, and a mysterious dwarf named Fitzko. Together, they created a system, finding, trapping, and torturing girls who came to the castle for work or education. It was said that Elizabeth even had a preference. She wanted virgins. She believed that their purity made their blood more powerful, more rejuvenating. Now, whether this belief came from folklore, superstition, or mental illness is still debated today. But the consequences were the same. More girls were lured into the castle, never to leave again. One servant testified that Elizabeth would sometimes dress in white and cover her face in a mask while she punished the girls, almost like a ritual. Some reports even claim she used silver instruments to drain their blood, collecting it for later use. Though the most famous legend, that she bathed in their blood to preserve her youth, might have been an exaggeration, the sheer volume of alleged murders suggests something far more horrifying than myth. By the time Ference returned home, even he couldn't deny the strange atmosphere at Countess. But whether he condoned her actions or was too fearful to stop her remains unknown. What is clear is that the castle had become a house of horror. He was likely suffering from a degenerative disease, and despite Elizabeth's access to the best medical minds of the time, nothing could be done. In 1604, Ference Nadasdy died at the age of 48. His death left Elizabeth more powerful than ever. She inherited full control of his estates, including vast lands, hundreds of servants, and enormous influence. She no longer had to answer to anyone. No husband, no oversight. She ruled as a widow with unchecked authority, and that's when things got truly terrifying. With Ference gone, the frequency of disappearances increased. Elizabeth no longer had to temper her behavior. She expanded her operations, even building a sort of finishing school at the castle to attract daughters of the nobility. Young women were sent there to learn etiquette and household management. Instead, they were subjected to a dark curriculum of pain and blood. And still, no one dared challenge her. Why? Because nobles protected nobles. Because the church feared scandal. Because people believed that aristocrats were chosen by God, and to question them was blasphemy. Elizabeth continued her reign of terror for years after Ference's death, and while it may have started with whispered suggestions and a few missing maids, it eventually snowballed into one of the most gruesome killing sprees in European history. And it all began with a marriage that was never truly about love. It was a partnership forged in blood, sharpened by cruelty, and soaked in unchecked power. A marriage that didn't just fuel the fire, it lit the match that turned Castle Countess into a living nightmare. Elizabeth Bathory's descent into madness was slow, methodical, and masked by the elegance of nobility. Her obsession with beauty began with whispers and rumors, but it soon consumed her life and the lives of hundreds of others. It all started, as the legend goes, with one fatal moment. A young servant girl was brushing Elizabeth's hair and accidentally tugged too hard. In a rage, Elizabeth struck her. Blood splattered onto her skin. Later, Elizabeth examined her hand in the mirror and became convinced that the blood had made it look younger, smoother. That single moment planted a seed of obsession that would grow into one of history's most disturbing nightmares. Convinced that blood, particularly the blood of young virgin girls, could preserve her youth, Elizabeth began orchestrating brutal rituals. She transformed Castle Countess into a house of torture and death. The grandeur of her nobility provided perfect cover. Who would suspect a countess, educated and esteemed, of crimes so vile? She began small. Village girls were lured to the castle with promises of employment or education. Once inside, they were stripped of dignity, safety, and ultimately, life. Some were beaten until their bones cracked. Others were cut with blades, burned with irons, or doused in freezing water. But the worst was yet to come. According to hundreds of testimonies, Elizabeth didn't just kill, she drained. Girls were suspended from beams and bled out like livestock. Their blood was collected in basins. She reportedly bathed in it, smeared it across her skin, drank it. Some claimed she stood in tubs while fresh blood poured over her, laughing, glowing. Her accomplices helped Ilona Jo, Dorothea Sentes, Katerina, and a dwarf named Fichko. They helped select the girls, trap them, and carry out the bloodletting. They believed in her madness, or feared her too much to resist. But this wasn't just about killing. Elizabeth became a connoisseur of suffering. She experimented with age, diet, and temperament. Which girls bled the best? Which blood left her feeling the youngest? She reportedly kept notes, compared skin tones, and even invented potions from blood mixed with herbs and animal fat. Some victims were starved before being killed. Others were humiliated and forced to eat pieces of their own flesh. Some had their mouths sewn shut or were buried alive. And yet, in Elizabeth's eyes, these were not crimes. They were treatments, prescriptions for vanity. She even created a finishing school to draw in noble-born girls. Daughters of aristocrats were sent to her castle to learn etiquette and refinement. Many never returned. And still, no one questioned her. She was powerful. She was feared. And she was hidden behind stone walls and titles. The killings escalated. Girls arrived weekly, and the castle grew quiet with the sound of muffled screams. Some bodies were buried in shallow graves. Others were burned in secret. And some, it's believed, were dumped in rivers or wells. Elizabeth bathed in their blood, not just out of belief, but out of need. She saw her reflection as a measure of power. Every wrinkle, every blemish was a threat. Her legacy wasn't enough. She needed to be beautiful. Forever. It said she preferred to wear white during these baths so the blood would stand out vividly. The red against the silk thrilled her. She would emerge from these rituals with a sense of triumph, as if she'd conquered nature itself. But even monsters grow bold. When peasant girls ran out, Elizabeth turned to nobility. And that is when her empire of blood began to crumble. The cruelty she bathed in for so long would finally catch up with her. But until then, Elizabeth Bathory remained the queen of a crimson kingdom, crowned not with jewels, but with terror. Castle Countess was no longer a noble residence. It had become a theater of cruelty, with its darkened stone halls echoing the silent cries of those who would never leave. To outsiders, it was an estate of grandeur, a fortress nestled atop a hill. But inside, it was a factory of death disguised by elegance. The very structure of the castle was shaped around Elizabeth Bathory's horrific needs. Narrow hallways led to hidden doors. Cellars doubled as prisons. Bedrooms, once intended for rest, became chambers of pain. There were trapdoors, secret tunnels, and iron doors that sealed victims in absolute darkness. Some rooms had chains bolted to the walls. Others had drain holes carved into the floors, not for cleaning, but for collecting blood. Survivors, few as they were, spoke of rooms where the air was so thick with blood and sweat that it became hard to breathe. The smell was unbearable, a sickly mix of metal, rot, and burned flesh. In the winter, the cold preserved corpses longer. In the summer, the air festered. Each room had its purpose. One was used for flaying, the methodical peeling of skin. A torture chamber was filled with tools. Iron tongs, branding irons, whips, nails, and custom-designed blades used to slowly carve the body without killing it immediately. Witnesses described girls hung by their ankles from rafters. Others were locked in cages too small to stand or sit. Some were beaten daily until they couldn't walk, then burned to death as punishment for crying. One report mentioned a wooden box lined with spikes, a precursor to the Iron Maiden, where girls were forced inside and bled out over hours. It wasn't just pain. It was performance. Elizabeth treated suffering like an art form. She recorded it. She evaluated it. She sought perfection in death as others might seek it in music or poetry. She had her favorites, not among the victims, but among the methods. She liked using scissors to slice open the skin layer by layer. She enjoyed using heated rods to burn patterns onto skin. One servant testified that she would bite chunks of flesh from victims with her own teeth chewing slowly as if tasting their fear. These weren't quick killings. They were drawn out, deliberate, prolonged until the victim begged for death. Sometimes that plea was granted. Often it was ignored. Servants spoke of being forced to help, clean the blood, bury the bodies, lie to the villagers. If they refused, they were beaten or killed. They lived in constant fear, not just of Elizabeth, but of being turned into the next treatment. The Countess was a master of control. No sound escaped. Screams were muffled by thick doors and layers of stone. Food was rationed to weaken the victims. Light was limited to disorient them. Time blurred. Hours felt like days. Days like weeks. Victims lost track of where they were, who they were, or why they were being tortured. It was psychological destruction before physical death. Castle Countess didn't just kill bodies, it erased identities. And Elizabeth thrived in that world. She wasn't just the mastermind. She was present. She gave instructions. She watched. She touched. She bathed in the blood that filled her basins. One servant described a bath where she ordered 2 girls to be suspended over her while she soaked in their blood, singing a lullaby to herself. The white marble of the castle, once clean and regal, was stained with rust-colored splatters. Furniture was torn, curtains shredded, walls scarred by blade marks. This wasn't a place of aristocracy anymore. It was a slaughterhouse ruled by a queen of cruelty. And yet, on the surface, Castle Countess maintained its disguise. Guests would still arrive. Letters were sent. Trade continued. Diplomats passed through. But behind the smiles and handshakes, the death toll rose. One priest who visited noted that something felt wrong in the castle. He said the servants were pale, thin, and nervous. He was never invited back. Despite the horror, Elizabeth's operation remained concealed for years. Fear, loyalty, and privilege kept her safe. No one wanted to challenge her. No one wanted to believe a woman of such refinement could be capable of such darkness. But eventually, the walls began to speak. One servant escaped and told his village what he had seen. Another girl's mutilated body was discovered near a stream. The rumors grew too loud. The church took notice. The king himself began to hear whispers. And so, the investigation began. Castle Countess, once a symbol of nobility, was about to be unmasked. But even before the authorities stormed in, the castle had already become a tomb, not just for the girls who died, but for Elizabeth's soul. It was the place where beauty became obsession, and obsession became horror. It was where one woman's vanity turned into the slow, systematic destruction of hundreds. Castle Countess wasn't just the scene of the crime. It was the weapon. For years, Elizabeth Bathory's cruelty had gone unchecked, protected by wealth, fear, and her family's unshakable reputation. But as with all horrors, eventually the whispers became roars. The sheer scale of disappearances had become impossible to ignore, even by those who had once turned a blind eye. What started as rumors of missing girls became village-wide panic. Peasants, once proud to send their daughters to work at the castle, now held their children close, whispering prayers against the darkness. At first, the noble families were too proud to believe it. After all, Elizabeth was one of them. Educated, well-mannered, royal. But when their own daughters, young girls of noble birth, began to vanish after attending Elizabeth's finishing school, their pride quickly gave way to dread. The Hungarian court began to take notice. Bishop of Veszprém, a powerful church figure, had heard too many reports to dismiss. Families filed complaints, and although Elizabeth's status shielded her, the pressure was mounting. King Matthias II, who had long tolerated Elizabeth's eccentricities in exchange for her family's loyalty and taxes, was finally forced to act. It wasn't just the missing girls. It was the consistency of the stories, the smell of rot near the castle walls, the unearthed remains discovered by hunters. Priests reported hearing servants confess to unspeakable acts, though always in hushed voices, afraid of retribution. In 1610, King Matthias commissioned Jurgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary and one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, to investigate the matter directly. Thurzo was not just a politician. He was a soldier, a strategist, and a man with ties to Elizabeth's extended family. If anyone could navigate the political minefield of exposing a Bathory, it was him. Thurzo began by quietly collecting testimonies. He sent men to surrounding villages to speak with families of missing girls. What they heard was horrifying. Young girls sent to the castle who never came back, occasional screams heard in the dead of night, and villagers who claimed to see blood being dumped near the castle's river. Over 300 sworn statements were collected. Some were from former servants who had escaped. Others were from priests, local magistrates, even minor nobles. The stories were consistent. Torture, mutilation, blood rituals, and bodies buried or burned by the dozens. Thurzo knew he needed more than words. He needed undeniable proof. What he found shocked even the battle-hardened Palatine. Inside the castle walls, the smell of death was overwhelming. In one room, a girl was found bleeding on the floor, still alive, but barely. In another, 2 bodies lay cold and lifeless. Evidence of torture was everywhere. Iron instruments, ropes, branding tools, blood-soaked floors, and tattered clothing that had belonged to dozens of missing girls. Elizabeth herself was caught in the act, some say, standing over a bloodied girl, unmoved, composed, regal. She did not scream. She did not deny. She simply looked at Thurzo as if to say, "You're too late." The arrest was immediate but careful. Elizabeth was too powerful to be publicly humiliated. There would be no dragging her through the streets, no stocks or gallows. She was taken quietly, and Castle Cactus was sealed. But justice would not come quickly, nor easily. Justice was coming, but not the kind that most people expected. In a time when nobles were seen as nearly untouchable, even mass murder could be buried under titles, influence, and silence. And Elizabeth Bathory? She wasn't just a noble. She was a Bathory, one of the most powerful families in Hungary. After her arrest, Elizabeth was never formally tried in a court of law. The political consequences would have been explosive. A public trial for a woman of her status could have shaken the foundations of the aristocracy and undermined the authority of the monarchy. So, a decision was made. Let the servant speak and let the Countess disappear. Her 4 closest accomplices, Ilona Jo, Doracha Sentes, Katerina, and Fitzko, were interrogated and brutally tortured. Under pain and fear, they confessed in detail. They told investigators everything: the luring of girls, the tortures, the murders, and the blood rituals. They described the layout of Castle Countess, the hidden chambers, and the methods Elizabeth used. Their confessions horrified even the judges. Dorothea and Ilona were sentenced to death. Their fingers were ripped off with hot pincers before they were burned alive. Fichko was beheaded, a small mercy in comparison. Katerina, who was younger and allegedly less involved, was spared execution but imprisoned for life. But Elizabeth? She was neither tried nor executed. To put a Bathory on trial was unthinkable. Instead, her punishment came in silence. She was walled into a set of rooms in her own castle. Windows were bricked up. The doors were sealed, except for a small hole through which food could be passed. No light, no company, no escape. It was a tomb for the living. For 4 years, Elizabeth remained imprisoned in her own castle. Guards reported strange behaviors. She would talk to herself for hours, sometimes laugh, other times scream in the night. Her health declined, and her mind slipped further into madness. She never expressed remorse. Not once. In her few written notes, she claimed to be the victim of political jealousy. She denied the charges. She insisted the accusations were fabricated to steal her lands and wealth. But her silence screamed louder than any denial. On August 21, 1614, Elizabeth Bathory was found dead in her sealed chamber. There was no ceremony, no official cause of death, no mourning. Her body was buried in the local cemetery, though villagers later demanded it be moved. Today, no one knows exactly where she lies. Elizabeth Bathory never faced justice in the way her victims deserved. She never stood in front of a court, never heard a sentence. But her legacy was sealed, etched in blood, fear, and the haunted silence of Castle Countess. By the time Elizabeth Bathory's name had become synonymous with vampiric cruelty and blood-drenched madness, whispers of a different story began to emerge. One that painted the Blood Countess not as a monster, but as a political pawn. Could it be possible that one of the most infamous serial killers in history was actually innocent? As outrageous as it sounds, there are historians, legal scholars, and skeptics who have pieced together an ultimate theory, a theory that casts doubt on the legend we think we know. In this version, Elizabeth wasn't the predator, but the prey. It begins with context. Elizabeth Bathory was a powerful, wealthy, and unusually independent woman. She owned large tracts of land. She ruled without a husband for over a decade. She challenged male authority. In 17th century Hungary, that kind of power wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. To many, she was more than just a noblewoman. She was a threat. Let's start with the witnesses, the 300-plus testimonies used to convict her in the court of public opinion. Most of these were gathered under duress. Torture was commonly used to extract confessions and statements. Even her accomplices, who told the most graphic stories, were tortured before they spoke. In modern terms, this evidence would be inadmissible. Confessions gained under extreme pain and fear are more often stories of survival than truth. Second, there is no physical evidence that confirms she ever bathed in blood. No bodies were exhumed from mass graves. No torture chambers were definitively found. The only material evidence came from witnesses who had motives or pressure to lie. When György Thurzo raided Castle Countess, he found one girl bleeding and a few dead, but not the mountain of corpses the legends suggest. Then there's Thurzo himself. He was no neutral investigator. He stood to gain significantly from Elizabeth's fall. By removing her from power, the king and Thurzo could seize her land and wealth. And they did. After her arrest, her estates were divided and absorbed by the crown and noble families. Her family name was disgraced, but the state's coffers were enriched. The political timing is suspect as well. Elizabeth had recently started asserting more independence. She was reclaiming debts owed to her late husband. She was building alliances. She was empowering local peasants with reforms that weakened noble control. Was her arrest truly about justice, or was it about silencing an inconvenient woman? It's also worth noting that Elizabeth was an early practitioner of herbal medicine. She treated villagers. She studied botany. In a superstitious era, where women healers were often called witches, this alone could have made her dangerous. Her interest in science could have been twisted into stories of witchcraft. And let's not forget how society viewed powerful women. Women who wielded authority without a husband were often demonized. Their sexuality was considered threatening. Their independence was viewed as unnatural. The bloodbath legend may have been a reflection of societal fear, a projection of what people thought a woman like her could be capable of, rather than what she actually did. Even the idea of her bathing in blood has folkloric roots. Tales of female vampires, witches, and demonic seductresses were common in Eastern Europe. Some scholars argue the bloodbath story was borrowed from folklore to explain Elizabeth's power and age-defying appearance. She was attractive, charismatic, and in her 40s. That alone could have been enough to spark suspicion. Of course, this doesn't absolve her of all wrongdoing. Even her defenders admit she may have been a harsh mistress. Corporal punishment was normal in noble households. Beatings, whippings, even deaths from mistreatment weren't uncommon. But these acts, brutal as they were, didn't necessarily amount to serial murder. The question remains, if Elizabeth Bathory had been a man or a poor woman, would the legends be the same? Would we remember her as a monster, or would she be just another noble who ruled harshly? It's difficult to say what the truth is after 400 years of myth-making. Records were lost, stories were exaggerated, and the winners wrote the history. What we do know is this: the line between fact and fiction is thin, especially when the stakes are wealth, power, and control. Elizabeth Bathory may have killed hundreds of girls in a quest for eternal youth. Or she may have been a powerful woman destroyed by envy, greed, and fear. Maybe the most terrifying thing about her story is that we'll never know which is true. Long after Elizabeth Bathory died in the silence of her stone tomb, her story refused to stay buried. Like the blood she was rumored to bathe in, her name seeped into the fabric of folklore, superstition, and popular imagination. 4 centuries have passed since her death, and yet the world still can't look away. Why? Because Elizabeth Bathory is more than a historical figure. She is a symbol, a myth, a mirror that reflects our deepest fears about power, vanity, cruelty, and the seductive allure of immortality. In the centuries that followed, storytellers transformed her from a woman accused of murder into a full-fledged monster. The stories grew darker, the numbers of her victims grew higher, and the blood, oh, the blood, flowed more freely with each retelling. She became the female Dracula, the prototype for every bloodthirsty noblewoman in Gothic literature. And literature came calling quickly. Writers in the 18th and 19th centuries began including Bathory-like characters in their horror stories. Poets referred to her as the Bloody Countess. Painters depicted her standing naked in pools of blood. Novelists made her the central figure of unspeakable evil, less human, more mythic. Then came the vampires. Elizabeth Bathory is widely believed to have inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. Though the character of Count Dracula was based primarily on Vlad the Impaler, scholars argue that the elegance, sadism, and blood obsession of Bathory helped shape Dracula's refined cruelty. Over time, she became Dracula's female counterpart. And it didn't stop with books. In film, Elizabeth Bathory has been portrayed in dozens of ways, from a seductive aristocrat in European art films to a supernatural villain in horror B-movies. In 1971 alone, 2 different movies were released portraying her life. Some films turned her into a tragic anti-heroine. Others made her an immortal vampire, still bathing in blood today. Video games like Castlevania and even popular culture giants like American Horror Story have borrowed from her myth. Her influence shows up in music, television, fantasy novels, and even fashion. Designers have named collections after her. Artists have created dark, romantic aesthetics centered around her name. But with all the glamorization came distortion. The real woman, the one who lived and ruled and died, was buried under layers of fiction. She became a symbol of horror, but also of feminine danger. A woman who dared to age, to rule, to live without a man, and who paid the ultimate price in legend. Today, historians argue over every aspect of her story. Some call her the most prolific female serial killer of all time. Others call her a victim of political greed. Many believe the truth lies somewhere in between. Castle Countess still stands, or at least its ruins do. Visitors trek to the hill where her crimes, or alleged crimes, took place. Tour guides speak in hushed tones, and tourists snap photos of moss-covered stones. Some say they feel the air grow colder when they walk through the dungeons. Some swear they hear faint cries echoing off the walls. Museums in Slovakia, Hungary, and across Europe display artifacts from her life: rings, letters, portraits. In some, her story is told with reverence. In others, with horror. No one tells it the same way. But everywhere, the fascination remains. What is it about Elizabeth Bathory that keeps her story alive? Is it the possibility that she was a sadistic killer? Or the chance that she was framed and forgotten? Maybe it's the lesson she leaves behind, that unchecked power can twist reality, that truth can bleed into myth, and that sometimes the most dangerous stories are the ones we still can't prove. Elizabeth Bathory is gone, but her legend lives on. In books, in screens, in whispers passed through centuries. And as long as humans are captivated by beauty, by fear, and by the thin line between fact and fiction, she always will. It's easy to dismiss Elizabeth Bathory's story as a product of its time, a gruesome blend of medieval superstition, unchecked power, and societal rot. But when you strip away the castles and corsets, the rituals and the blood, a question begins to haunt the mind. Could something like this happen today? The disturbing answer is maybe. Let's start with the psychology. Experts have long debated what kind of mental illness could have driven Elizabeth's actions. Many point to narcissistic personality disorder, which is characterized by an extreme need for admiration and a lack of empathy. Add in sadistic tendencies, where a person finds pleasure in inflicting pain, and the possibility of psychopathy, and you have a dangerous cocktail of traits. Now combine that with isolation, wealth, power, and fear of aging, and you get a psychological pressure cooker. In modern times, we don't bathe in blood, but we do spend billions on anti-aging. From luxury serums to bizarre treatments like vampire facials, where a person's own blood is extracted and re-injected into their face, the obsession with youth is still very real. The difference is that now it's done in sanitized clinics with consent forms and celebrity endorsements. But the psychology hasn't changed. Our society still idolizes youth. We still treat aging as a flaw. And those with the most money and power often chase beauty in ways that most of us can't afford or understand. While the methods have changed, the mindset hasn't. Vanity still rules, and sometimes it rules cruelly. Then there's the issue of power. Elizabeth got away with what she did for years because no one could challenge her. She controlled the land, the people, and the narrative. Even when the rumors spread, even when the bodies started piling up, the system protected her. Her name shielded her. Her wealth bought silence. Sound familiar? In recent years, the world has watched powerful figures, politicians, celebrities, CEOs, abuse their positions for decades before being held accountable. Victims were silenced. Whistleblowers were punished. And systems that should have protected the vulnerable didn't. So yes, the conditions for a modern Bathory still exist. They just wear different clothes. Perhaps the most chilling thought is this: if Elizabeth were alive today, would she even need to kill? Or would she be a billionaire selling beauty products with cryptic ingredients, worshipped for her ageless skin, hidden behind a veil of luxury and PR teams? Would she be punished? Or sponsored? And would we believe the victims? Elizabeth Bathory's story is more than just a horror tale. It's a cautionary one. It reminds us that evil doesn't always scream in the streets. Sometimes it whispers in mansions. It wears silk robes and dines on silver. It hosts charity balls and poses for portraits. And it always finds a way to survive, unless we choose to see it. So, who was Elizabeth Bathory really? A noblewoman driven mad by power and vanity? A victim of a massive political conspiracy? The truth is tangled, woven through centuries of fear, fascination, and folklore. There is no way to separate fact from fiction completely. Records have been lost, stories have been twisted, and history, as always, has been rewritten again and again. Some say she murdered over 600 girls. Others say that number is pure exaggeration. Some say she bathed in their blood. Others insist it's metaphor, not memory. Some say she was evil. Others say she was targeted because she was a powerful woman. Here's what we do know. Girls went missing at an alarming rate around Castle Countess. Elizabeth's own servants described horrific acts. The political players around her benefited greatly from her downfall. Her legacy was shaped as much by rumor as by record. Whether she was a monster or a scapegoat, her story survived. It became legend. And maybe that's the most important truth. Because legends, real or imagined, hold power. They teach us. They warn us. They reflect the darkness that still lives in the corners of our world. Elizabeth Bathory's name lives on, not because of the crimes she did or didn't commit, but because her story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Who gets protected by power? What do we ignore in the name of wealth or beauty? And how far would someone go to preserve what they fear losing most? Monster or martyr, Elizabeth Bathory forces us to look in the mirror. And sometimes what we see staring back is far more terrifying than blood. If you like this history, please don't forget to give it a like. And please make sure to subscribe the channel.